also seek to overturn the current power. And right now, our society we don't live in the modernist era anymore. We are moving out of the modernist era. There's a video of Alexander Dugin on the BBC. Alexander Dugin is the brains behind the Russian state ideology that now that Putin and the other guys who are running the Russian government are following. But in Dugin is saying to the BBC, he's going, there is an American truth and there is a Russian truth, and they are different, and so that's now the era that we're living in, where there is a big questioning about historical narratives and whether they are objectively true or whether they are serving ideologies. So now we're moving into that phase of history, which also people are. We live in a society where it's predicated on the idea that every human being live for themselves and just for the thing that make them tick, rather than people existing for greater ideas, living for a sense of purpose or destiny. That's like the biggest thing also that you see coming back to England from Rojava, is how in Rojava everybody is engaged in, we're going to build this thing, we're going to make this thing. There's a sense of energy and optimism in the society, whereas here in England there's none of that. People are very lost. It's tragic. It's really sad to see. There's no people don't have any sense of striving for something greater. We're kind of lost in this spiral downwards. It's not that people don't have the same amount of money. The problem is not a problem of material wealth. It's the lack of meaning or purpose in the society. It's actually crazy that England has such huge rates of mental disorders. And that's,
same in the United States, and I would say what you're saying applies to the U.S. pretty equally. I
haven't seen in Syria, where there is a war, the same level of crazy people as I've seen in England.
Which you would think, counterintuitively, you would think that a war-torn country like Syria or Rojava would have more mental illness. But what you're saying is, in a peaceful place like the United Kingdom or even the United States, you actually see more mental illness, and it's ultimately doesn't have anything to do with war or peace. It has more to do with the sort of spiritual decay in the West, maybe in the United Kingdom, whereas Rojava, they're thriving spiritually and culturally because they found an ideology within themselves to believe in themselves in the future, rather than, like you said, believe in some outside power like the state or some political movement or some political figure. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and also if we want to be able to move as a body of people towards a goal, you need a plan, you need an ideology, and it's not just about the things that you do, it's also about the ideas behind that, and about teaching people, about people learning the philosophy and the ideology, so there's a sense of coherency in our action. Now, I think the biggest problem in technology or open source is before, in the root of the free software movement, there was a very strong sense of we are going to create software because we believe in the freedom of the user. Not that the software should be free, as in no cost, but software that people, that everybody has source access to, that empower the users of that software to be able to have control over that software that they use, and But as the movement's gone on, and you also see this with the hacker movement as well, being hollowed out of its political ideology, and instead free software became open source. You know, we have the software open source because it's convenient, because it enables us to make better functioning software rather than it being about the cause of freedom. And the hackers instead of becoming people who question power, people who built technology to challenge power, the hacker movement became more about tinkering and playing with technology, which it doesn't actually change the society around you. Random acts of self-expression don't change things.
You're right, because they're not as powerful as that coherent vision or purpose. If it's just random, acts of self-expression, they don't have much lasting power. Sorry, go on with that thought.
So, if you stop believing in God, and then you realize, wow, the universe is enormous, like so huge, and Earth very, very small, and all the humans on Earth are really small. And so actually, it's all meaningless. There is no God-given purpose. It's easy to become nihilist, and then think, oh, what's the point? There's no point. But what make a person great is being able to overcome that, to develop their own sense, their own meaning and purpose. And I can't say Hitler was a bad guy. Like, I can't actually say he was a bad guy. Like, but he just had different values to me. You know, and I can't tell you. For instance, I can't explain why I think nature is divine. It's just something I accept, and I can't. And it's just part of my identity as a person, and my values. And values change all throughout history. There is no upwards linear path. There are simply different cultures that struggle against each other. So if you go to the meetings of the Liberals, or you go to the meetings of the Jeremy Corbyn supporters, and they're always talking about, the working class. Guys, the working class doesn't even vote for you anymore. That's how out of touch they are with reality.
Wow.
And so that's why now there's like I guess it's like a growing awareness or sense that there are different cultures and they struggle against one another, and when you try to integrate those cultures by dividing them, by liquidating them of their values, what you get is a hegemony. For the type of capitalism we live in today is different to 50, 60 years ago. The way that the system is working to maintain its hegemony is a lot more sinister, through there's a gigantic network of signs that is completely disconnected from anything that's real. And so that's why I think really, like, our focus should be to put nature back into the center of that. And I don't mean nature as in like trees and flowers or whatever. I mean nature as in what is innate to humanity. When you see a wolf in a forest, like a strong wolf, and he has strong instincts, and he's fierce. That's like a apex of a life form that's been produced through millions of years of evolution. And then when you see some of these small dogs, the ones with tiny legs, and what our society has done to that wolf to turn him into a toy, and that's what's happening to us as human beings.
Yeah.
In the schools, from a young age, we are taught to memorize things, to regurgitate them. We're not taught to have an understanding about any of the subjects, like a real understanding. And also, we're not, the schools don't even engage in what is the basic, like fundamental questions that people should, like, what is the meaning of life, or how should I live a good life? How should I be a good human being? Like, the schools don't talk about that at all.
You're right.
That's not what I would call an education.
Far from it. The education system is spiritually void. And, that's a great analogy with the dog and the wolf, because, as much as we like dogs and they're friendly, they've been bred essentially to be inferior to the wolf, because a dog can't survive in the wild like a wolf can. It's not as fiercely aggressive in its defense like a wolf. All that stuff has been bred out of it. And the same with what you're talking about with cultures being homogenized and assimilated into the hegemony that you mentioned. And then on a smaller level, it's happening in the education system, where kids are homogenized and assimilated into the system through education, and they're also robbed of any spiritual development. So it happens on a national and international level, and it happens at the level of the individual person's education. I think that's really very brilliant.
Yeah, and what they say in Rojava, what their philosophy is talking about, is not there is a state and we have to abolish the state. They are actually saying that the state, which is the professionalized class of bureaucrats, of people who are the monopoly of force, is actually a construction that come from an analytical intelligence, analytical ways of constructing society, but decoupled from the subjective side. As in there's no ideology or philosophy.
Kind of like
behind, when it's purely just driven based on material wants.
Right. Kind of like, almost, not to make it too simplistic, but too much left brain and not enough right brain, you might say, which is kind of the popular way people might understand that.
Well, that's not useful, because both of the old left and right wing were very materially based. But
I meant left and right brain, like analytical brain versus more.
Oh, brain!
Brain, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
No,
exactly.
I've got allergies, so I got some congestions. I'm not.
No, I must have misheard. Also, so that's the state. What the state is, like a professionalized class of people managing other people. But also, in terms of, as anarchists, what we want to do is we want to strengthen civil society.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then you get into all the questions about economy, defense, the individual society.
Yeah, but if you can strengthen civil society first, you can then answer the questions of defense and broader societal issues. Once you've strengthened civil society, instead of strengthening and emphasizing the state, the professional class of managers, because that civil society, like you said, is the wolf, where it's people in their natural state of being their own master and living their life according to their own ends, rather than the dog who is subservient to the state professional managerial class. Would you agree with that?
Exactly. And in the communism, they want everybody to be under a state and people to be weak, whereas in anarchism, we want people to be strong and uplifting the society.
Absolutely, and that's beautiful, and that's so true. Well, let's switch gears real quick. I think that was a great discussion about the philosophical underpinnings of anarchism and what's happening in the world and what's behind Rojava. And speaking of personal strength, Your story is one of personal strength, both your personal strength and the personal strength of those with whom you fought. So I want to know more about that. So how did you find out about Rojava, and how did you, who did you contact when you decided to go over there?
I found out about it on Wikipedia, because I was reading about a guerrilla group in Iran, and I was reading about guerrilla group in Iran, and it said 50% of their fighting force is women. And I was like, what, in Iran? Like, it didn't make sense. I never heard of it before. And then I found out that it was actually an affiliate of the PKK in Turkey. And I was reading it. I was like, oh, it's just a Stalinist group, whatever. Then I read like 2 sentences where they said, we want to make an economy of the people, by the people, for the people. And I was like, that didn't sound very communist. I was like, wow, it sounds anarchist. So I started to read a bit more. And then I found out that they actually had a revolution in Syria. And in that time was when very few people had heard of it. So I got sucked into just reading intensely about it all day, every day. And I was like, well, you can't escape. You can't escape going to a place like that if you become so absorbed by it.
Yeah, so you just became very fascinated with it, and you became really passionate.
It sounds incredible.
Yeah, and you just became really passionate about their cause and the fact that they sounded genuinely anarchist.
The politics. I don't give a fuck that it's in the Middle East. It could be in Antarctica or the moon or wherever.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'd still go. There's no relation for it being in the Middle East. It's just coincidence.
Which I think is great because
it's pretty amazing.
I think a lot of us who are, anarchist or libertarian would not expect such a movement to form in the Middle East. We might expect it to happen. Well, I don't know, maybe in Latin America or something. Really, it's
yeah, exactly.
It's a very unlikely thing in our expectations to happen at all, let alone in the Middle East. And that's, I think, a beautiful thing, because when it happens in the least expected part of the world, that gives it a lot of strength and appeal amongst people who are observing it. So, so you learned about it that way, and you decided to get involved. And so, how did you get involved? Who do you contact to get involved, and how did you get over there?
Well, I contacted them over internet, and then I got a plane ticket to Iraq. And going to Rojava, the biggest thing that struck me, first of all, was meeting people with an incredible presence and such huge knowledge about philosophy.
Really? So, you when you met these people, you could converse with them about anarchist philosophers or libertarian philosophers. They
knew more about it than me.
Wow.
The anarchism.
That's impressive.
I was like, wow, I actually know nothing about the politics or philosophy. They know everything. That's what they spend years and years, decades, studying it in the mountains. That's what the guerrillas do in their spare time.
And that's when you know it's legitimate, because you can encounter other so-called freedom movements or even anarchist movements, so-called, and ask people about the ideology and maybe the literary or scholarly basis for that ideology, and they probably generally would know little to nothing. And I think when they know little to nothing, that's the sign that the movement is not it's not really about a genuine ideology. It's about something else. But when they really have that firm intellectual basis, then that's a really strong sign that what you're dealing with is a genuine freedom anarchist movement. That's really impressive and really promising. So continue.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, and the knowledge of the philosophy is what gives them strength.
Absolutely.
There's so many times here when I'm hearing people discuss politics and their ideas are just confused. They're just mixing lots of different things. And also the anarchism as well. I think a lot of it's been infiltrated by ideas that's just completely destroying all of the movement. You know, so a lot of it's just decadent and hedonistic. It's not actually revolutionary, and there's also a lot of lifestyleism. Like you think a person, there's too many excuses for people to do politics in the West and pretend that they're actually doing something, but actually what they're doing is just feeling good on Facebook. And it's completely egoistic. It's not actually driven by them wanting to further their ideas. But these are like basic things that literally, if people want to learn, it is going to have to be organized groups of people sitting down in classes studying the philosophy. You know, like when you paint a really good painting, when you paint a picture and you spend all that time and effort to make it nice, but then at the end you feel good at the result. Or you know, when you climb a mountain and you know you get to the top and you know afterwards you have that feeling of fulfillment. You know, that's like if we want to make this thing, it's like, guys, we're gonna have to work and we are gonna have to make sacrifices because we want to accomplish something great,
right?
And it's just not gonna happen through I don't know, it's too many, like, you know, the art, for instance, like a lot of people aren't questioning art enough. I don't think there's like this idea that art is kind of elevated above society and above politics. Actually, a lot of the art, like the modern art, it question everything, you know, and I can understand what it's trying to say, but I just don't like it. I just think it's purely animalistic and purely ego driven. Like if you actually look at for instance, the art in the time of the the so-called Dark Ages was the time when the Christianity was spreading. That like art is laden with values. It's actually like there to spread an idea, to change the society. Whereas the art we have today, it's about shock value, a lot of it.
Right.
And and it's trying to be radical, but it's actually not. It's actually part of the system. It's like an enabler of this hegemony.
You know, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, sorry to interrupt, but no, you're absolutely right. And in fact, you said it's part of the system, and that's literally true. There's stuff that's come out in recent years about the United States federal government, like the CIA, for instance, funding or being a part of much of the modern art movement as far as trying to influence people in a certain way. And that's not surprising given how modern art does sort of serve the system and how it is just completely different from art that's come before it. And you're absolutely right. Like George Orwell wrote a whole book called All Art is Propaganda. And propaganda doesn't have to be negative. It can also mean imparting values, imparting ideas that are positive and good. And you're absolutely right. Art can't be separated from society at large or the culture because it is a reflection of that, and it is about imparting values. And so with modern art, it's completely different. And I think what you're saying is you see that reflected in modern intellectual movements in the West, like even anarchism, where it's all about egoism and narcissism, and it's all about just personal selfishness rather than truly spreading important values or ideologies. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. So in the ideology of Rojava, you talk about nature, and like when we talk about so-called humanitarians, You know, like if I give money to a charity or I give money to a homeless person, I'm not actually reducing suffering. So if we really want to reduce suffering, if we really are humanitarians, then we should seek to change the politics to, like, in a real way, because humans are always going to be created, humans born and die, but what we can do is we can change the future, and a humanitarian or an ideology that put nature at the center is not about the number of human beings that we create. It's about the type of human beings, or about like what come from the richness and beauty of nature is not the number of trees. It's all the different life forms, the interrelations between the richness, the diversity. And that's how we have to look at also our humanity and our culture. You know, all the clothes that we wear today, a lot of them are really cheaply made, or the food that we eat, it's crap, or the way that we live. You know, we're not being enriched, we're not developing as human beings from the modern society that is extremely materially wealthy, but is also destroying the soul of humanity. Like the amount of science and technical development that's gone into the construction of the prison system, of geopolitics, of the state is incredibly well developed, and always when societies become in their philosophy, in their governance, exclusively materialistic. And when I say materialistic, I mean the reality or the world is seen purely in terms of what's physical and what's completely rational and analytical, rather than there is another level that is operating on human beings, which is the level of belief and ideology and the spirituality. You know, in the past, when a kid was raised from a young age, he was taught to be a Christian, and he had a sense of destiny or purpose in his life. He had values as a human being. Whereas after World War II, there's a big reaction against that, which was the new generation saying to their parents, "You caused World War II, and now we are going to question everything. We are going to reject everything that came before." And maybe that was needed in some way, because tradition had become too overwhelming and too limiting in the society. But we've gone so far in that direction now that there is a new form of death which is operating on the human being, but it's not one of hunger and starvation, but it's one of a lack of destiny and historical trajectory. That, you know, if you have a child and that child is too sheltered, he will not be able to be strong and operate independently in the world at large. And so now what we are doing is breeding sick human beings, and that's why mental illness is so there's such enormous amounts of mental illnesses in the West. And so, like, if you know, like when you live in the forest, and I'm not saying that we should go live in the forest, you know, cities and towns and urban living is here to stay, but there is another side that we need to also develop. And when we're talking about nature, it's also not just like a human being is a human being, but the nature of that human being, how connected that human being is to his instincts, to the things that he feel that he wants to do as a human being, not just abstract analytical intelligence which objectify that human being, that make him operate purely based on robotic principles, but another side of the human being, and that nature that nature is something that is inherent, and when we oppose nature, we are also opposing the human being, and when our exploitation of nature, which is the analytical intelligence, and don't get me wrong, has led to huge amounts of material abundance. When that's deconstrained from an emotional intelligence, from a sense of the divine, from a belief or an ideology, then what happens is that's what's happened now, which has led to this hegemony, which is leading to hierarchy and denying people their agency and their free will.
Yeah, it's
and
go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
No, I think you're right. If just to kind of restate what you're saying, when you oppose nature, the nature of man, which is to be, historically, men were connected with nature, literally itself, like, the trees and plants and animals, but also they were connected with their inner spiritual side. When you'd have what we would call primitive, quote unquote, groups that would have shamans and spiritual dances, and they would have trances that they would go into to connect to the divine and the spiritual side. It didn't always have to be that extreme, but you had these societies in the past that were, each person in each group of people was deeply connected with the nature of the outside world and nature of the inside world, and that was healthy and that was in balance. But when you oppose nature the way society does today, you have imbalance internally within men, where there's too much of the analytical side and not enough of the spiritual side. And then you see that reflected in the broader society, in all the egotism and narcissism and all the mental illness and all the imbalance. And that's also reflected politically in the hierarchy, because I think if I'm understanding where you're going, and I think this is true personally, that hierarchy is only possible to the extent that it exists because of the imbalance that has been created in men's nature. If men were more in touch with their nature, these hierarchies would be difficult to exist. Or what do you think?
That when we exploit nature for purely egoistic material wants, then we are dominating nature, and that man's domination over man is because of man's domination over nature. Because when we exploit nature and we use the environment as an object, then we are doing that to the exclusion of our belief, or of our spirituality, of our ideology, and so we are negatively impacting, or we are opposing our belief, and where that belief is, and where we are working to exalt nature, to celebrate man in his natural, instinctual form, and then somebody who's opposing nature by establishing themselves over that, to exploit that, to use that, how the society uses technicians in the prison to re-engineer people's souls to make them politically less harmful to the state. That's when you have and yeah, that's what lead to the hegemony, and also that's what lead to the hierarchy as well, and the domination over nature. Like the two are linked together. It's something that you have to, that when you understand that there's no reason I can explain analytically why nature have a divine sense, but it's and I'm not saying, I mean, it's not like when you have a religion is a collection or a body of beliefs which get people to either celebrate a god or celebrate the divine, which is to celebrate nature or life or whatever. But a lot of these religions, they also emerged out of earlier spiritual beliefs that begun in the forest, and there are two sides. Like now we have a system, a world which is completely analytic. Well, we have a globalist system which is analytically based, the Western society, which is based off of relations of force that are analytically managed off of people that are trained from a young age in the schools to be completely ego-driven, to live just for their next fix, to earn money, for drugs or for girls, rather than having a spiritual destiny or having an ideology, which is the object or the main goal or purpose of their life, recognizing that through that struggle they will develop as human beings, they will reach the apex with their striving and ambition, like that wolf becoming stronger and actually becoming fulfilled in the life. Like, how far can we reach dizzying great heights? And that happens by being a revolutionary, by doing radical politics. And when we want to do radical politics, we have to have a clear understanding of what is our situation now, and we need to develop ourselves in all of the ways possible, not as a specialist, but to become complete, rounded human beings.
Yeah, holistically. Well, tell us.
Yeah, completely holistically.
I think we've done a really good job of establishing the spirit and philosophy behind anarchism and opposing this hierarchy and hegemony and getting back to harmony with man's nature and nature in a broader sense. So I guess tell us how. Let's get to Rojava again, and tell us how, while you were there, you feel you were able to advance this radical new politics. How you're able to advance, or at least act upon, these philosophical points we've been talking about.
Yeah, well, all of the things I'm saying were things that I've learned from Rojava, from their ideology. But now I'm basically just talking there. I'm just expressing their ideology.
So you learned a lot of this Rojava just from being over there.
Yeah, and also studying their works and their influences.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah, because I guess I had assumed that maybe you had learned a lot of this prior to going over there, but you learned a lot of this while there and while reading some of their influences, like you said. Well, what about, I know aside from fighting that you did, you were also able to help do some more directly humanitarian things while you were there once you had been removed from the fighting. Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah, no, it wasn't humanitarian. I worked on economics projects, but I also helped out with media and training, and I also did a lot of organizational work as well.
I have a question. What about the white helmets? I was reading this deal by Vanessa Beeley about how it was just a propaganda machine where really, the Syrians were afraid of them because they weren't helping anyone. They were just basically posing for pictures to make it look like they were helping.
Yeah, the white helmets is bullshit. It's absolute bullshit.
And what is the white helmets?
a group that's funded by American government, gives billions and billions of dollars, and is affiliated with Al Qaeda. But because America wants some way to pass money to these rebel groups or help these rebel groups that are fighting against Assad, who's an ally of Russia and Iran, but without people knowing that they do it. So they fund these groups like the White Helmets.
Where they're literally going in there and blowing buildings up, and then going inside to rescue a couple of people for a photo op, and then they leave everyone else inside the building.
You know how much a lot of the movements and causes the liberals support in the West are actually funded by Western governments, and people support them. Like, do you know how many I've been in London, and how many times I've been going to different places, and I always see people with the Palestinian flags or the shirts or the signs, people that call themselves anarchists, and nowhere do I see anybody talking about Rojava. I only find that funny, like Palestine, which maybe in the past had some movement with a struggle for the people, but now it's been taken over by Islamists.
Yeah, I remember we
people are seriously confused.
We talked
and
with
a lot of it seems like the
Syrian.
Helmet,
we talked with
testimony of the. Like, have you heard of the Naira testimony?
The
Naira, the first Iraq War.
No. Are you talking about the?
No, sorry. When Saddam invaded Qatar.
You're not talking about the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter's testimony.
Yeah, exactly. That one.
Where she said that they were taking babies from the hospitals out of the incubators and stabbing them.
Crying and
and she was. It turned out she was the Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter, and she had been coached by a New York PR firm to say all those things, and they were all lies.
Yeah, and that was a really important video that swung public support in favor of the war. Even though it came out, it was a piece of propaganda. It already served its use. That's why movements here in the West, they lack an ideology, they lack a politics, and so they're just constantly reacting to things happening around them.
That's a really good point.
Driving forwards as a movement.
That's a really good
with a destination.
Right.
No, that's a brilliant point. It's a great example of what you were talking about, or have been talking about this whole time, which is if you don't have an underlying ideology to motivate yourself to push your actions forward and to build a better world for yourself and for society, you're going to fall for every little propaganda piece because your whole mindset is one of reaction, emotional reaction. That's it. Because you have no ideological basis.
When we spoke with Mimi Alhambra, she was telling us about the $150 being paid to Al Qaeda and ISIS in U.S. currency, and then and then there was another video of a general or something saying something about I think we can do something like $150 stipends to help this or that. But he was talking about a completely different program, but yet at the same time they're paying terrorists the exact amount of money that this general was talking about.
Just coincidentally.
Same time, no biggie.
Exactly. Yeah, it's crazy. You were at least involved in doing a lot of economic projects, and I know your original intent was to go there and use your computing and coding skills to help them. Were you able to do that? Were you able to help them with any sort of cybersecurity or just computer infrastructure projects that allowed them to, just improve things over there?
There's a lot of work to be done in Rojava.
Yeah, I can only imagine. But were you able to utilize your greatest skill set while you were there, like you had originally intended, or was that not? Or did you not really have the opportunity?
I went there with the intent that I'm there to put myself at the service of what they're doing, and whatever's needed of me, I will do it. So I ended up to work on a lot of things, and in a wide variety of areas. and also to learn and develop it in a lot of ways, and also to understand the nature of organizing a society, of being able to, for a society to be able to develop with a common objective that engage a lot of people. So that's something very like there's a lot of things now that is happening in Rojava. It's probably the most important revolution of this century, and we really need to be studying what are the ideas that are behind this revolution, and to take away from that, because Öcalan, who is the leader of the PKK before he went to prison, and then he read Burkin and he became an anarchist, and he started to write all of these books. Öcalan have a very contemporary philosophy that is talking about the problems that we see in the society now, and people need to like study these works and understand like what are the like what the things that they are saying, and also that is drawing on like a lot of very different strains of the philosophy, but the entire set of ideas together from a very coherent whole, and the politics is not, political philosophy is not something that's eternal. It doesn't exist forever. You always need to be developing like new political philosophy for the time. So we can't be dogmatic about the things that we believe. And this political philosophy is the most contemporary political ideology, apart from the other one of Alexander Dugin, which is an anarchist philosophy, and it's time that we say as anarchists, like, guys, how long have we been doing this? How many decades have we been doing this? And what have we changed? What is actually different? Like making our bookshops and our vegan cafes and our home and our cinema places doesn't actually change the thing. What actually change things is actually to organize with people in the society and to try and take the political power, and it's not something that is going to be necessarily fun or easy, but it's actually hard work that we need to put time into, and effort, and work with a sense of dedication, and that we're existing for a higher objective, not just for ourselves, because society doesn't develop just simply through exchange of one person doing something for another person, and then that person responding back in an exactly equal way. Society develop because there are people who put themselves out there, who take a first step, and the more you have a society of people who are willing to make sacrifices because they have a belief in something that is outside of them, the stronger that society can be. That's how the society can. That's how we can further new ideas as a culture, as a body of people, and right now, I'm gonna say that the society is in a crisis, but it is also an opportunity. That if we can become organized, that we can we have a very good chance of planting a flag in history. And so now this is a call to everybody, to start to get organized with a sense of purpose, as a common project, and that the ideology is there if people want to study it and to understand it. And as technologists, we have basically a superpower, but that superpower is not purely material. It is also hugely symbolic. And actually the fight that we're engaged in now is moving into the symbolic sphere. The attack on Westminster, it killed 4 people, and I was thinking, why the terrorists, why they don't try and use drones or explosives or do something fancy and kill more people? Why, like, if I was a terrorist, why aren't they doing that?
Good point. Yeah, why not?
Then actually I realized, like, wow, they're actually really smart, because now anybody with a car can be a terrorist, and there's no way for the system to be able to abolish that. No way. So we're trying to fight against, like, ISIS is not an organization. ISIS is an ideological movement. We're trying to fight it on a material level, when actually we're fighting a spiritual belief. So if we want to be effective in this new fight, like, because now this is the arena that's opening up to us. It's not that the system has abolished all physical relations of force. And I'm not saying, like, when I reject what's material, both of the things have to be in balance with each other. There has to be an interplay for a society to be the most, for a society to reach its apex, for a society to be the most well developed, because one feeds into the other.
Yeah, but you need a balance.
You need balance, exactly. So now, what we are entering is also, there is a new space that's opened up, which is the fight on a symbolic level, for us to be able to form coherent cultures or bodies of people with a set of positive values that they strive for as a group, and to have force or power behind that, to be able to strike against this hegemony, to be able to defend itself against the process of assimilation, of the breakdown into individuals, into the liquidation of values. And technology is a very powerful symbolic weapon in that. It's not purely the products that we build. Like Bitcoin, how long? I've been out of Bitcoin for 2 years, and there's lots of things happening in Bitcoin. There's not anything really happening in Bitcoin, like Bitcoin I feel like Bitcoin has kind of lost its ideological impetus, the thing that was like propelling it forwards, the thing that was giving it strength. It's kind of like now, like Bitcoin is meandering. There isn't really like a sense or a feeling with Bitcoin that, wow, this is actually something can strike at the nexuses of power, that can actually advance the politics. Because a lot of Bitcoin people, they don't understand this aspect. They're like, okay, we're a lot of programmers and a lot of techie people, and we see the world as computer models. But there's another side which is less based off of abstract thought. It's based more on culture and the time now.
The sort of
the
environment, and then concrete action within the contemporary environment. You're right. Like,
exactly.
So Bitcoin, so whether it's Satoshi's white paper and other comments he made, or whether it's what many of the early Bitcoin developers like you or others talked about, it's that philosophy of freedom, of censorship resistance, of decentralization, and that you're right. I feel like some of that's being ignored or watered down over the past year or two as people get bogged down in the technical problems. But then the technical problem itself is a philosophical problem, because it ultimately is about what people want Bitcoin to be. And I think you're right. People are losing sight of what Bitcoin was meant to be originally, what everyone was on board with Bitcoin being about resisting the hierarchy, resisting the New World Order, if you will, or the internationalism, globalism, whatever you want to call it, and all the central banking fiat hegemony that's out there. And in losing sight of that, I think Bitcoin is sort of floundering, and hopefully Bitcoin will continue and will thrive. But I think what you're saying, and I agree, is that the philosophical sickness in Bitcoin right now is kind of throwing things off. And can we switch gears for a second and actually talk about Bitcoin, since we're on that topic? Along with the sort of philosophical issues, you can't disentangle that from some of the, I guess, more technical debate. Have you been following the whole block size debate issue and Bitcoin Unlimited and segregated witness? Have you been keeping up with any of this ongoing discussion?
Yeah, no, I would. My advice to people would be don't necessarily just follow the technology itself, but follow the interests. So when you have a guy like Peter Todd, who is on one side, and then you have people like Gavin and Rojava and other people on the other side, then you have to, then it's pretty clear which sides to support. And yeah.
Well, is it clear though, or what? How is it clear? I guess.
Well, because it's Peter Todd and all the best developers.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, no, fair enough. I just wanted you to state that, just so people were understood what you meant by that.
Like the developers who worked on Bitcoin since its very beginning and got nothing personally out of working on Bitcoin, but work on Bitcoin because they believe in it based on principle. Yeah, I trust those guys.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. It's not just that he's one of the best developers out there. It's not just that he's been involved in Bitcoin development from basically the beginning. It's also that he's been philosophically consistent. Like he hasn't tried to make money off it. He's not been paid off by anybody. It's through his actions and, of course, his words. It's still clearly about the original philosophical intent behind Bitcoin with someone like Peter Todd. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, look at, for instance, people like Gavin. They form a foundation together with business people, but not business people who are entrepreneurs who support Bitcoin, because it will liberate people from the central banks, but business people that are interlinked, that are complicit, that are members of banking organization and large corporations that are interlinked with regulatory power and the state, and try to form a foundation with them, and then try to dominate the development process through titles rather than an organization of people and a governance process that is focused on furtherance of Bitcoin and
rather than
as a
ideas,
liberatory technology,
right?
you know, and they pretend to be non-political while having developing Bitcoin with the objective for it to be a more convenient payments innovation rather than a revolutionary technology to challenge the power of central banks.
Yeah, that's a really good point because with the Bitcoin Foundation, and even arguably with what was it, the Blockchain Alliance, where it was the group of law enforcement and 30 Bitcoin companies, it started to become more about personality and other interests rather than good ideas, including the original philosophical ideas behind Bitcoin.
But how fucked up you have to be to know that the central banks are bad, that they are funding wars, they are destabilizing the life of people in the West and around the world, and you have a technology to undermine that, to bring back power to the hands of people, and actively work against that, and then pretend that you are just an innocent, humble engineer who's trying to make the best decision in a difficult situation. Like, these people are manipulative. They're actually sinister.
Well, I will say that the way you presented it, and I mean that's true, is when you see them saying one thing and doing another, kind of, it's very questionable, at the very least. I mean, it's hard to imagine that there's some sincerity or a real commitment to philosophy when you see that going on. Yeah, absolutely, and it's very discouraging, and it makes you lose faith in the whole project, or at least it makes you lose faith in a lot of people that you once thought were like philosophically dependable, I guess.
Yeah, and the thing is like when we pretend that we're going to abolish violence, actually at the base of that is a huge amount of violence, and that's essentially what they are. Like, they're trying to stabilize Bitcoin as a new radical threatening technology. They use language aphorisms to actually hide what the true intent of their actions is, or what actually the actual real outcome of their actions are, which is essentially violence against Bitcoin. And but there's a lot of knowledge, or there's a lot of technique that actually goes into that form of manipulation.
What would you give some examples of those aphorisms, those manipulative type of aphorisms? Can you?
Like they use the language of saying that they're going to use Bitcoin they're going to, for instance, for instance, they wanted to make blacklists. They didn't call it blacklists. They call it like consumer protection technology. So actually, it's saying that it's going to protect you, but actually, what it is going to harm you.
That makes sense.
They're wanting to identify coins that were associated with the Silk Road or whatever dark markets, and then like reject those from the transaction.
That's right. I heard about that. Yeah. So in other words, broadly speaking, these sort of Orwellian euphemisms for
that censorship, or no?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly, for basically censorship or cracking down on consumers or groups or Bitcoin users. No, I see exactly what you're saying, and I do feel like you do see a lot of that sort of semantic or linguistic manipulation out there, and it's very insidious.
Yeah, well, also what happened is they're not particularly they're not married to the idea of Bitcoin as a technology. Where they see Bitcoin is the use for themselves, to establish their position, not because they believe in Bitcoin and they want to work for Bitcoin. So, but because they're operating on that principle, because that's how they are living their lives, they lack strength, and so to maintain their position, then they have to resort to violence, and violence is not just like hitting somebody, but is actually all forms of coercion that you can use against somebody to compel them, and it all does rely on, when we get down to the base of it, relies on the apparatus of a state and law and police. So
yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
That's something that we need to understand that exists and that we're going to use, but we have to realize what is the motive behind using those tools, because when that become purely based off of want rather than living to become fulfilled, when that's just existing for the now rather than us seeking to do great things to aspire to become higher, that's when you get corruption of.
Yeah.
So
watch out for
anarchist.
Yeah, go ahead.
As anarchist, the biggest what Bookchin was saying, which is the guy that Öcalan read when he became anarchist, is that we cannot reject these things and say, oh, we're not going to use them, but we need to properly understand them and how we use them, because the state is something that exists, and we want to oppose the state, but we can't place ourselves outside of politics, outside of contemporary politics that exists now. So if we want to be able to overturn the state, we also have to understand it well and how we can use it for the advantage of our philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to understand the mechanics of the state, the ideology behind the state, to the extent that there is one, because oftentimes the ideology is simply power for power's sake, and we can't ignore it because it's there. You can't just put your head in the sand and pretend like it's just not going to affect you. The state, the power structure, the hierarchy will affect you, and like you said, even in Bitcoin, we need to watch out for people who are selfishly motivated for short-term gains for themselves, rather than selflessly motivated for long-term gains for society at large, or at least for the Bitcoin community at large. And, I'm not going to pretend to name names, or even if I even have any names in my head, but there are definitely those people out there, and we may not always recognize it, but there are signs, and, one sign here, one sign there may not mean that person is suspect, but it's always worth looking out for those signs nonetheless. And so, I think you're absolutely right. And that's probably why there's so much conflict in Bitcoin right now, is because the two sides, as it were, the ideologically grounded and philosophically principled side, and then the selfishly motivated side, are kind of at odds increasingly. So we'll see how it ends up. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. We've had a really great discussion. This became much more philosophical than I expected, and I love that. That's the kind of stuff I like getting into on the show, because I think it's so important, and it's so intellectually stimulating and fun to do that. But I guess a couple more things. I guess my last question on Bitcoin specifically, what do you see in the near term for Bitcoin? Do you see segregated witness being adopted? Do you see Bitcoin Unlimited being adopted? Is it still unclear? Is Bitcoin going to survive either way? or at least for the short term, or what do you think?
If so, before you said selfish and non-selfish people. I think a more useful distinction would be making people realize, actually, what are you living your life for? We're all going to die one day. Why not to live on through your ideas, through accomplishing great feats and reaching dizzying new heights, rather than living like an insect, or just living for your next paycheck or next
meal,
fix.
or that's really true.
Like, let's put our heads together and make something amazing and become incredible people.
And let's become immortal through our ideas. I like that.
And the Bitcoin now, it needs a good kick, because if it keeps on meandering and lacks an ideological focus, it is going to die. But it's not going to die because the technology failed, but it will lose momentum and stop. Its heart will stop. And this is not only a call for Bitcoin, it is the call for the world, or for technology and for people to form an ideological focus, and to that they can create coherency between themselves as a movement, be able to move forward, be able to attack, to be able to be effective in how they fight. And now we are in a very special moment. Bitcoin is the forefront of technology, and technology is one of the most important ways that history is shaped. And if we can develop like a clear conception of the situation that we're in now, the role that the technology is playing, we can use that knowledge to inspire lots of other people on our path. We can create more anarchists, and we can give a beating heart to this principles that we have, that we can actually plant a flag. And that's why Bitcoin is something that I care about, and I think Bitcoin is with a huge amount of potential, but I don't think Bitcoin's path is predestined. I never thought Bitcoin's path was predestined. The Bitcoin is inevitably going to become this massive waterfall that breaks through, and we just need to sustain it and passively sit back. No, we have to actually be very active with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is only a symbolic weapon. Like, the technology by itself is actually worth nothing. There's actually also a social movement behind it, and all these brilliant ideas that are being developed about contracts and decentralized governance and resource management, that we need to keep developing and actually putting into practice, because letting ideas gather books in dust is pointless, whereas action without knowledge is blind. And that's why in Bitcoin now there are a lot of people who are enthusiastic about the technology, but there's no sense of direction with where they're putting their effort. They're developing a lot of cool toys, but it's not really fulfilling a coherent need. That's the biggest problem with Ethereum. Like, I respect Vitalik for his technical knowledge, but there's no social knowledge behind it. And we have to also realize that these technologies don't operate blindly in the society mechanically, but they are performing a social function. And we also have to be responsive, because I want to further politics, but I also need to understand, like, what are the needs of people. And so I can use the two to create a inflection, so I can create a transfer between both of the phases. And now there's a new space of fighting that has opened up, and unless we are on point and also working with discipline and dedication towards our beliefs, then we will lose the moment, and we will be written out of history as a group of people, as a culture of people, as anarchists, and now what this movement is lacking is basically a sense of energy or force behind it. The problem with evolutionary philosophies like the liberalism is that they see the world as happening, as operating outside of them. The things just happen spontaneously, and it's very passive. And actually, what we need to have is a radical culture where the people are constantly developing new philosophy, because that's what inspires people to go and make things, and not just make any things, not just make things blindly that do things, but things that serve an objective, serve a purpose. And it's like I met an investor once, and we explained to him that we're interested in doing politics. All of our technology serve a social motive, and he was showing us all these apps that he's made before, and telling us that we were saying to him, like, okay, these are all cool, but they're not actually things that change the world. And he's trying to tell us that, well, people buy them, so therefore it changes the world. And it's like but they're basically just toys. And a lot of the technologists now, you guys have power, like incredible power, and also you have values. As human beings, we have values, and if you are doing what you should be doing as a human being, you should be seeking to shape the world around you, to strive upwards, to become stronger, and you need to work for your values, work for your principles, to spread that, to shape the world, not waste your time like a kid, like a adolescent that never grew up, tinkering, making toys. It's worthless.
You're right. And go ahead.
Yeah, I like to tell the police when I see them, I say, you're not a man, you work for the Queen. You're taking a salary, you're protecting elite interests. If you're a man, you wouldn't work for somebody else.
Amen. I like that. Tell the cops. That's what people should do here. No, and you're right. And like, even when you talked about the technologist creating the apps, he said, you're changing the world just by selling the apps, but you're not. That's, I'm glad that you brought this up earlier. It's a very materialistic view of how the world works. It's not simply you create it and mechanistically the world changes. Like you said, the world changes through ideas and values and actions in pursuit of those ideas and values. Because technology can be either useless or can be useless without values or without ideas, or it can be destructive if you don't. Certain technologies can be used as weapons unless you try to spread those technologies with the value of creation and positivity and what's good for humanity. So you're totally right. It's all it's as much social as it is technological, and people need to keep that in mind and not just rely on the technology only, but promote it with these ideas and values, and to take action, because that's the only way things will ever change for the good. I want to ask you one last thing, if I may, just switching gears, and then you can give us some final thoughts too on everything. But speaking of technology and Bitcoin and changing the world and all the good philosophy behind all of that, is there any news on Dark Wallet and any development that might be happening?
Yeah, once I get my passport, I'm going to put a team together and finish it.
Wait, say again? Once you get your passport, you're going to get a team together and finish it. Is there any timeline on that, or you're still kind of trying
Yeah,
to?
I'm waiting for my passport, and then a few months, and then it'll be finished.
Excellent. Well, I hope you get that worked out. A few months is not a long time, although I know what it's like. I lost my passport once while on a trip to Mexico, and that's a different situation than yours, but that was bad enough from my experience. I can only imagine.
Especially on my end, I had to smuggle you in.
That's right. It was hard on Danny, too. But I can only imagine the process you're having to go through, so I wish you luck with that. And we're really excited that once you do get that straightened up, you can get going with assembling a team and get that project going. And we'd love to have you back on when that happens to discuss what's going on with that project. So,
of course, here in person, even, right?
Or here in person, yeah. So once you get that passport, you are welcome to come to Austin, Texas, and hang out with us at the crypto show. And of course, what's his name? I'm blanking already.
This guy in front of us?
You know the guy, Cody Wilson. You know Cody Wilson, of course. So all the more reason to come to Austin if you ever get a chance once you get your passport. But well, I guess Amir Taaki, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful interview. We went places that were unexpected but delightful. I love talking philosophy with someone as smart as you and someone as deeply researched into philosophy, and someone who's had all the experiences that you have, and who's just intimately wrapped up with Bitcoin and the Bitcoin community and all Bitcoin principles and anarchist principles, obviously. But I guess, do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I want people to start reading the works of Abdullah Öcalan, and in particular, Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, Part 2.
If people,
capitalism on Amazon.
Sorry.
If people try to understand the ideas inside of that, and also study the works like Bookchin, Murray Bookchin, Nietzsche, the postmodernists, and the Mesopotamian ancient history.
Mesopotamian ancient history. Really? Just because you think the problems of the Middle East go that far, or is that more for philosophy?
Well, not only Mesopotamia, but also the Cossacks and the native Indians, and in particular the Iroquois people, and Mesopotamia, and also the Mongols. They're really fascinating peoples.
Interesting.
And also there's a lot of overlap between their beliefs and also how their societies were organized. So there are things that we can learn from those different paths that history took, but ultimately got assimilated.
Awesome. And then I guess last two things. It's Alexander Bookchin, is that right?
Oh, Murray Bookchin.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mariah?
Murray Bookchin.
Okay. And that's a Russian philosopher, right?
Oh, no, Alexander Dugin.
Or Alexander Dugin. Sorry, I'm butchering everything.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of overlap between the Kurdish, the ideology of Rojava, the philosophy of Rojava, and some of the things that Alexander Dugin is saying.
Okay, so people should look at Alexander Dugin. And who was the first gentleman you mentioned? It sounded Arab.
Abdullah Öcalan.
And
Ocalan.
And what was the name of the work again?
Oh, Manifesto for a Democratic Civilization, Part 2, Capitalism, on Amazon.
Excellent. Well, guys,
he state in the beginning of the book that what he wants to do is merge the Western philosophies with the Eastern system of positive values.
That
and then go into a lot of things from there.
Well, that sounds very pioneering and fascinating. Well, we'll have to check that out. I'll have to get that book. I'm always fascinated in new ideas, especially when it comes.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Also, the level of of coherency, that all of these different philosophies that he's brought together form a whole centered around nature at its center.
Fascinating.
You know, and it's not, you know, like a lot of the things that anarchism says are very confused, actually, when we get down to it. And also a lot of the movements have been infiltrated by things such as like the identity politics.
Oh God, yeah.
Which Öcalan criticized a lot.
Oh, I like him even more. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear. Well, I encourage everybody to check out those authors and those works. If Amir Taaki gives them the thumbs up, I think they're worth reading, and I'm going to have to get me a copy myself and get started reading on that. Well, Amir Taaki, I really appreciate your time. I know your time is very valuable, and we're honored to have spoken with you and had a really interesting discussion with you here on the Crypto Show, and we would love to have you back once you get your passport or once you get the Dark Wallet team going, or for any reason, that if you want to talk more philosophy and anarchism, we'd definitely love to have you back as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Perfect.
Excellent.